In 2025, Bad Bunny put a line in an album that millions of fans accepted as settled fact. Aquí nací yo y el reggaeton. Here is where I and reggaeton were born. Puerto Rico. Case closed. Except it isn't. The dembow beat underneath every reggaeton song you have ever heard, that bouncing, stuttering pulse that locks into your hips whether you want it to, was not born in Puerto Rico. It was born inside one of the strangest political accidents in the history of the Western Hemisphere, a strip of American territory carved through the middle of another country, a colonial wound that became, improbably, a sonic laboratory. The place is Panama, specifically the housing projects ringing a U.S. military zone. Barriadas, where the descendants of Jamaican and Barbadian canal workers grew up hearing American hip-hop blast from military bases across a fence, while dancehall played in their own homes, while Spanish was the language of the street. Puerto Rico took the sound global. But the question this episode asks is the one the charts don't answer. What specific conditions, geographic, colonial, deeply human, produced a rhythm that now powers one of the most streamed genres on Earth? To answer that, you have to go to the Canal. To understand why Panama, you have to see what the Canal did to the people who built it. The French began digging in 1881, assembling a labor force of roughly 40,000, 9/10 of them Afro-Caribbean, from Jamaica, Barbados, Martinique, Trinidad, Guadeloupe. The project killed over 22,000 people before it collapsed. The Americans took over in 1904, employing over 75,000 workers total. Most again West Indian, especially Barbadian. About 5,600 workers died on the American side alone. The colonial architecture was explicit. The Americans divided their workforce into two payrolls: the gold roll for white workers, better wages, proper housing, sanitation, and the silver roll for black workers, who got the dangerous jobs, the crowded quarters, the higher malaria exposure. The Canal Zone was U.S. territory from 1903 to 1979. In January 1964, Panamanian students tried to enter the zone to fly Panama's flag. A scuffle broke out, and the flag was torn. Over 20 Panamanians were killed, about 500 injured. January 9th became Martyrs' Day. In 1977, Carter and Torrijos signed treaties guaranteeing Panama would reclaim the canal. The zone was formally abolished October 1, 1979. 1977, the very year the treaties were signed, was also when the first reggae song in Spanish was performed in Panama. A community denied a Panamanian identity, and not American either, was finding its voice at the exact moment the colonial superstructure above it began to dissolve. But the music needed a spark, and that spark came from two people hardly anyone remembers. In 1977, a Guyanese immigrant known only as Guyana and a Panamanian DJ called Wasabanga performed the first known reggae song with Spanish lyrics in Panama. No label was present. No one filmed it. But people in that room knew they heard something new. To understand why that room existed, why these people were in Panama at all, you have to trace a migration that began decades before anyone thought about music. Jamaica and Barbados had been sending workers to Panama since the 1840s. First for the railroad, then banana railways, then the canal. By the 1940s, the port city of Colon had at least 10 local jazz orchestras. A Panamanian pianist named Luis Russell traveled to New Orleans in 1919 and ended up playing alongside Louis Armstrong. In 1984, producer Hernando Brin pressed the first vinyl record of reggae in Spanish in Panama, a release called Treatment on the Prodim label. 6 years before the dembow beat had even been named. Through the mid-1980s, artists Renato, El General, Nando Boom, Chicho Man took Jamaican dancehall rhythms and sang over them in Spanish. Nando Boom, born Fernando Orlando Brown Mosley in Panama City on February 14, 1970, developed a grinding dance move that would later be called perreo, the signature dance of reggaeton worldwide. The figure whose story opens the most doors is Edgardo Armando Franco, born September 27, 1969, in Rio Abajo, Panama City, of Jamaican descent, who grew up listening to Bob Marley and Burro Banton. His friends called him El General. Here is where the story gets strange. El General received a scholarship and left Panama to study business administration in the United States. He became a professional accountant, but while earning his degree, he was emceeing at parties, opening for dancehall and hip-hop acts in New York, absorbing the black diasporic music scene. His breakthrough came in 1991, when a Jamaican producer arrived in Panama searching for a different sound. The result was Tu Pum Pum. In 1992, El General won an MTV Award for Best Latin Video for Muévelo. His albums eventually went gold 32 times and platinum 17 times. That award came before the genre was even named. El General's records traveled further than the man ever did. But to understand why they conquered a continent, you have to rewind 2 years before Tu Pum Pum to a Kingston studio and answer one question. Where did the beat itself come from? In 1989, the Jamaican duo Steely and Clevie created a rhythm called the Fish Market, a 3+3+2 cross rhythm with a syncopated bounce. In 1990, Shabba Ranks used it for dembow, Jamaican patois for they bow, aimed at those who submit to foreign influence. Anti-imperialist, deliberately. That same year, producer Dennis the Menace reworked it as pounder, dub mix tuern. Helentun. According to music scholar Wayne Marshall's 2008 research, elements of those two tracks appear in over 80% of all reggaeton productions ever made. El General recorded a version called Sun Bo. In translating dembow into Spanish, bo stops being a verb meaning to submit and becomes a noun. Translation was also transformation. And then one of those tapes crossed the Caribbean. So why Panama and not Colombia or the Dominican Republic or Havana, the most musically sophisticated city in the Caribbean for most of the 20th century? The answer is structural. The Canal created a community with no equivalent elsewhere. Afro-Caribbean people who had built the most important infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere and were then denied membership in the country they'd built. These communities lived in neighborhoods like Rio Abajo, pressed against the Canal Zone fence, where American military bases brought hip-hop and R&B within earshot of the barriada. No other city in Latin America had this configuration. Here is the receipt. In 1985, Renato released a song called El DENE. The DENE was Panama's secret police under Panama's military dictatorship. Renato sings from the perspective of a racist officer. Con mi cara albina, te puedo golpear. With my albino face, I can hit you. This track is credited as the first reggaeton song ever recorded. It was not a party song. It was a protest anthem. The founding document of the genre was an act of political resistance. The cassette tapes moved, sold to bus drivers, traded in neighborhoods. By the early 1990s, they had reached Caribbean diaspora communities and Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, the sound landed in housing projects like Villa Kennedy in San Juan. Producers set up in carports called marquesinas. The underground circuit, DJ Negro's The Noise Eye and 2, DJ Playero's Playero 37 and 38, became the most popular music among young Puerto Ricans outside the formal industry. The word reggaeton itself first appears in a 1994 Daddy Yankee freestyle on Playero 34. He took reggae and added a Spanish suffix. Puerto Rico renamed it, and in renaming it, began the process of owning it. Before global domination came suppression, and suppression proved the music had real power. In February 1995, Puerto Rican police raided 6 record stores in San Juan, confiscating hundreds of cassettes under obscenity laws. The Department of Education banned underground music and baggy clothing from schools. Senator Velda Gonzalez convened public hearings in 2002 to regulate reggaeton's sexual slackness. The crackdown made the genre more vital. Ivy Queen, born Martha Ivelice Pesante Rodriguez in Añasco, Puerto Rico in 1972, joined the Noise Collective in 1995 as the only woman in an all-male group. Her first song, Somos Raperos, Pero No Delincuentes, a title aimed directly at the state. En Mi Imperio followed in 1996, picked up by Sony Discos in 1997. Then, 2004, Daddy Yankee released Gasolina, and NORE released Oye Mi Canto. Both tracks broke reggaeton to mainstream American audiences the same year. By 2006, Daddy Yankee appeared in a Pepsi commercial. Ivy Queen became the spokesperson for Mountain Dew. But here is what happened on the way to the top. When reggaeton first reached the United States, it was called Música Negra. As the money grew, the marketing shifted toward a pan-Latino brand, what scholars call blanqueamiento, whitening. The black Panamanians who invented the form were erased from the official story. El General retired from music in 2004. The same year, Daddy Yankee went global and became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He exited at the exact moment his invention conquered the world. In 2023, Panama City opened the Museum of Reggae in Spanish on Calle 13 in the Santa Ana neighborhood, nearly 40 years after Hernando Brin pressed that first vinyl. 10 pioneers are recognized: El General, Rude Girl, Renato, Nando Boom, Chicho Man, Carmencita Anderson, Gringo Man, Apache Ness, Super Nandi, and Principal. And that's where we return to Bad Bunny's line. Bad Bunny was not wrong. Puerto Rico took a sound from the margins and amplified it to a scale nobody in Rio Abajo could have imagined. But the dembow bounce in every reggaeton song you have ever heard was assembled by Jamaican producers, named by Shabba Ranks in 1990, translated into Spanish by Afro-Panamanian artists in a neighborhood built by West Indian Canal workers who never fully belonged to the country they'd built. The music was resistance before it was a genre. The only question left is, who else has been erased from a story that still carries their DNA?